We are obsessed with sterility, antiseptics, helmets, parenting group chats going into hysterics over the slightest scratch. We are used to believing that childhood is a perfectly safe, soft, fluffy bubble, but this greenhouse illusion shatters completely against the harsh concrete of our recent past. Just a couple of generations ago, survival was the main yard game. What guarantees a loss of parental rights today was called a happy time back then. That world brutally exposes the absurdity of our current fragility because it was a real toxic amusement park. Welcome to a grim expedition through the ruins of an era without seatbelts and anesthesia. After this, your worldview will crack at the seams. How could anyone passionately chew asphalt and roll balls of poisonous mercury with their bare hands? Why were lead knuckles, magnesium explosives, and punitive dentistry considered the norm? Forget the fairy tales about the most delicious ice cream. We will expose the terrifying dark side that people today shamefully prefer to keep quiet about. Take off your rose-colored glasses. The countdown has begun. Number 1. Petroleum bubblegum. Picture a typical residential area in the late 70s. A scorching August noon, melting air distorts the outlines of 5-story panel buildings, and a group of schoolchildren sits in the yard, enthusiastically chewing on something radically black. This is tar, ordinary construction resin obtained from the nearest heating pipeline at the risk of ruining clothes and skin. Back then, getting your hands on real sweet chewing gum was harder than hacking the Defense Ministry server through a kitchen radio. The system simply did not provide for the generation of such loot for regular users. Therefore, the collective childhood hive mind launched an alternative search protocol and hacked chemical reality itself. The taste of fresh diesel fuel mixed with the aroma of hot crushed stone, and the substance stubbornly clung to tooth enamel, working as an aggressive file archiver for baby teeth. We chewed heavy industry waste as if it were a premium health point restoration elixir. Jaw muscles were upgraded to the state of a hydraulic press. Apparently, the universe was too lazy to code normal sweets, so it just reskinned the asphalt texture into an edible object. Number 2. The belt-driven Inquisition. Loading the medical location in this version of reality was always accompanied by the smell of ozone, burnt bone, and sticky, chilling terror. You cross the threshold of the dentist office and hear that sound, a low-frequency hum that makes your spine vibrate involuntarily. Waiting for you in the chair was a machine running on a primitive belt drive, like a loom from the early Industrial Revolution. The rotation speed of the drill was so pathetic that the machine did not so much drill as methodically crush tissue, transmitting seismic waves straight into your skull. And the most brilliant feature of this protocol in its ruthlessness was the absolute lack of pain relief for underage users. We were simply ordered to open our mouths and endure while the specialist performed a hard formatting of our hardware without safely removing the damaged sectors. The body went into deep shock. The nervous system burned out from overload. We genuinely believed this was healing, but in fact, it was a psychological crash test. It seems the developers just did not have time to load the anesthesia drivers, deciding that pain saves computing power. Number 3. The communist grail. Remember a sweltering summer avenue, asphalt melting under the sun, and a buzzing, sparkling water vending machine with a line of thirsty people around it. The machine proudly offered drinks for a few pennies, but the main artifact of this location was a single-faceted glass for the entire city. The cleaning mechanics of this vessel are striking in their engineering absurdity. You pressed a metal platform, the device rinsed the glass with ice-cold water for exactly 2 seconds, and the dishware was considered sterile. Millions of people with different sets of bacteria, viruses, and genetic codes left their biomaterial on the very same glass facets. From a cybersecurity perspective, it was an open peer-to-peer network without the slightest hint of a firewall, where users voluntarily exchanged malicious code through a physical port. We consumed the microorganisms of the entire neighborhood and walked on, feeling incredibly refreshed. Surprisingly, continental-scale epidemics did not happen. The biological antivirus handled the flow of threats as if running on an overclocked processor. Apparently, the microbes themselves got lost in this illogical fluid exchange architecture. Number 4. Liquid Terminator in the palms. A classic domestic disaster scenario. A careless movement, a bump against the edge of the table, and a glass thermometer shatters into pieces. In a modern simulation, this would cause panic, apartment evacuation, and a call for people in hazmat suits. But in our base firmware, the fear of heavy metals was completely absent. Nobody called emergency services. We perceived a spill of toxic mercury as a sudden drop of a rare interactive item. Children would sit on the carpet and spend hours rolling shiny, perfectly round balls of liquid metal with their bare fingers, trying to merge them into one massive drop. It was like playing with physics engine glitches. The material behaved unlike normal liquids, mesmerizing us with its alien behavior. We absorbed poisonous fumes, integrating a chemical threat directly into our metabolism for a minute of visual pleasure. We thought it was magic, but in reality, we were simply violating basic safety rules. Nature created the most beautiful death trap, as if a game designer placed shiny landmines in the starting location, testing our intelligence level. Number 5. Asbestos Roulette. The evening twilight behind the concrete garages was always the perfect testing ground for non-standard physical reactions. The central event of yard magic was a bonfire, into which someone inevitably threw a piece of construction asbestos slate. The mechanics of this process required iron nerves and perfect timing. First, the material rested peacefully in the flames, heating up and accumulating internal tension like a time bomb. Suddenly, a deafening pop rang out and the slate detonated, scattering a cloud of red-hot shrapnel and toxic dust in all directions. It was a local area of effect test. You had to get out of the blast radius before the system dealt critical damage to your physical shell. From a simulation architecture standpoint, we intentionally overloaded a physical object with thermal energy, forcing its engine to throw a fatal error and shatter into polygons. We played Russian roulette with construction debris, dodging shrapnel with the agility of digital ninjas. Ironically, a material designed to protect roofs from the elements turned into a weapon of mass destruction in the hands of children. Number 6. The Amulet of Alienation. The image of a typical elementary schooler of that era is impossible without one mandatory artifact dangling on their chest over a wrinkled school shirt. It was a massive metal apartment key tied to a tough clothesline or a stretched out shoelace. Losing this item was equivalent to complete account deletion. You would never get home, and in the evening, a punitive operation from the parental committee awaited you. This key worked as a hardware security token, permanently bound to your physical body. We ran through construction sites, jumped across garages, and fought in the snow, constantly checking for the presence of cold metal on our chest. This primitive two-factor authentication system deprived us of freedom, turning us into hostages of a piece of steel. If the string broke, a real panic began, shifting through the sand and scanning the area down to the last pixel. We thought it was a sign of independence and adult trust, but in reality, we were simply microchipped in an analog way. The administration of fate hung an anchor of responsibility around our necks so we would never forget who owned our server. Number 7. Flammable debugging. Returning a child from summer camp was often accompanied not only by a tan, but also by the presence of illegal biological passengers in their hair. When the system detected a lice infection, parents did not run to the pharmacy for mild shampoos with chamomile extract. Heavy artillery of industrial chemistry was deployed. The head was heavily smeared with combustible aviation kerosene or rubbed with toxic insecticidal soap, and then hermetically wrapped in a rustling plastic bag. The healing mechanism looked more like a radical wipe of an infected hard drive, using a flamethrower and caustic acids. The child sat in this scalp gas chamber, choking on toxic fumes, while the parasites died along with whatever was left of common sense. The scalp burned, eyes watered, but the bug extermination algorithm worked flawlessly. We used poisons capable of scorching crops to deal with a microscopic problem. It was a victory of brute force over the delicacy of biology. Apparently, the creator decided that fire and chemicals were a universal patch for fixing any organic misunderstandings. Number 8. Toxic dump alchemy. City outskirts and abandoned industrial zones served as our main resource bases for crafting gear. Old, broken car batteries were considered the most valuable loot, hiding incredibly heavy and highly desired lead inside. We smashed plastic casings with stones, extracted plates covered in poisonous acids, and carried them to the fire. The smelting process took place in a rusty tin can. The metal slowly turned into a silvery liquid, emitting heavy gray fumes that we eagerly inhaled. Brass knuckles, keychains, and fishing sinkers were cast from this toxic sludge. Molds were made right in the damp earth. In game logic terms, this was crafting high-level items in a high radiation zone without any protective gear. We voluntarily saturated our lungs with heavy metals just to get a weirdly shaped piece of lead. Nature generously scattered chemical weapons across the locations, and we took it as an invitation to technical creativity. Fate was clearly mocking us, making the most dangerous processes the most fun. Number 9. Vacuum exorcism. Seasonal colds in our childhood were treated with methods more suited for banishing demons. As soon as you started coughing, mom would take a box of thick-walled glass jars, a long metal knitting needle, and some cotton wool out of the closet. The process resembled launching a hellish collider on your back. Cotton was wrapped around the needle, soaked in alcohol, and set on fire. This torch was thrust inside the jar for a split second, burning out the oxygen, after which the glass was instantly pressed against your skin. The vacuum sucked in the flesh with terrifying force, leaving perfectly round, purplish-black hematomas on your back. This mechanic was based on harsh thermal throttling. The system was intentionally overheated and traumatized, forcing the immune system to urgently reallocate resources and fight the bruises instead of the virus. We lay there, shackled by glass domes, feeling like test subjects in a mad scientist laboratory. We thought the heat was drawing out the sickness, but in reality, we were just enduring localized capillary ruptures. It was a brutal hack of human anatomy. The creator was definitely chuckling, watching us treat our respiratory tracts with vacuum torture. Number 10. Aviation crafting. When basic tools of destruction got boring, yard engineers moved on to high-tech explosive devices. The pinnacle of this underground science was the search for magnesium, which was mined by filing down parts of old airplane landing gear at aviation dump sites. The resulting silver shavings were mixed with potassium permanganate crystals stolen from the home medicine cabinet. This unstable binary mixture was wrapped in several layers of thick paper, tightly bound with electrical tape, creating an explosive packet of colossal destructive power. The detonation mechanics were unpredictable. Sometimes the device exploded right in your hands from the slightest friction, leaving deep burns. This was an attempt by users to access developer tools, generating effects that broke the server balance. We synthesized gunpowder from things lying under our feet, ignoring the 100% risk of self-destruction. No safety manuals, just a hardcore trial and error method with the risk of losing a limb. We were looking for adrenaline, and nature simply did not have time to put up invisible walls around chemically active elements. Number 11. The pendulum of natural selection. The architecture of Soviet playgrounds deserves a separate mention in the Handbook of Industrial Injuries. The main attraction there was always giant metal boat-shaped swings. These multi-ton welded iron structures swung on creaky pipes to incredible amplitudes. No rubber bumpers, no speed limiters. If a child accidentally entered the working zone of this kinetic pendulum, a blow to the skull from a metal corner led to an instant trip to the intensive care unit. The interaction mechanics with the object did not forgive positioning errors. The hitbox of the swing was absolutely solid and had no damage absorption zone. We flew on these rusty ships, defying the laws of gravity, while unsuspecting toddlers ran below. It was a test of reaction speed and spatial awareness, where the price of a mistake was a broken spine. We thought it was fun, but in fact, the government had built a perfect machine for sorting out weak users. The irony is that the most dangerous place in the neighborhood was an area created specifically for children recreation. It seems logic has left the chat at this point, but we are just warming up. Number 12. The celluloid screen. The visual effects of our childhood were created literally from garbage and toxic polymers. Picture the scene. A schoolboy gets his hands on a broken roly-poly toy or a cracked ping-pong ball. At that moment, the chemical weapons creation protocol was launched. The plastic was mercilessly crushed into small pieces, tightly wrapped in foil, leaving only a tiny hole, and set on fire. The celluloid reaction mechanics caused a massive release of incredibly thick, pungent, and toxic white smoke that instantly filled stairwells and classrooms. In terms of server logic, this was a classic method of overloading the graphics card. We spawned an infinite number of smoke particles to drop the frame rate of the entire surrounding reality and disrupt a school lesson. Eyes watered, lungs burned from the poisonous gas, but we enjoyed the dense smoke screen, feeling like tactical saboteurs. We thought it was an innocent joke, even though we were mass poisoning ourselves with combustion products. The architects of this world clearly skimped on safety filters, allowing children toys to be turned into smoke grenades. Number 13. The Botanical Patch of Illusions. Any yard battle was incomplete without knees and elbows scraped down to the meat. When the health bar dropped rapidly and blood oozed from a wound, nobody ran home for antiseptic. That was considered a shameful exit from the lobby. Instead, a search for the nearest plantain bush was initiated. The healing mechanics are astonishing in their unsanitary nature. You had to pick a dusty leaf covered in city dirt, spit on it generously, and stick it right onto the open bleeding wound. From a a biological standpoint, we were introducing millions of bacteria from saliva and street dust into damaged tissues, hoping for the magical properties of chlorophyll. It was a classic placebo game item that provided a buff solely due to the user blind faith in its effectiveness. The most amazing thing is that in most cases, the immune system handled this dirty bomb, and the wound actually closed. We were sure nature had created a perfect medkit right under our feet, not suspecting that we were simply training our white blood cells with extreme loads. The dark humor of evolution is that we survived not because of the plantain, but in spite of it. Number 14, lead typography. Even basic physiological needs in that reality involved the consumption of heavy metals. Since specialized toilet paper was considered a rare artifact available only to the chosen few, most bathrooms in the country featured neatly cut stacks of old newspapers. The interaction mechanics with this interface were brutal. Stiff paper, coated in printing ink with high lead content, was used for the most delicate procedures. We literally rubbed ideologically correct text into our skin, receiving microdoses of toxic substances through mucous membranes. In information technology terms, we were trying to clear the system cache using infected, rough text files that dealt physical damage to the hardware. People read front-page articles about industrial achievements, and then those very same news stories left gray lead marks on their bodies. We thought we were just saving resources, but in reality, we were participating in an absurd cycle of information and toxins. The Office of Destiny came up with an elegant way to force the population to absorb the news on a physiological level. Number 15, pocket artillery. Weapon crafting was not limited to explosives. A true classic of engineering thought was a homemade firecracker assembled from a bicycle spoke, a bent nail, tough thread, and match heads. The design was brilliant in its simplicity and suicidal instability. The match heads were crushed into the spoke tube, the nail was inserted, and the contraption was slammed forcefully against the asphalt. A deafening gunshot followed. The mechanics of this device were one giant bug. With the slightest excess of match mass, the spoke was blown to pieces, turning the nail into a flying projectile and the creator fingers into a bloody mess. We were compiling unstable code right in our own hands, running a script that had a 50% chance of dealing critical damage to the shooter. Kids walked around with hands blackened from burns, deafened by their own shots, but continued to modify this melee weapon. We thought we were controlling the energy of a micro explosion, but in fact, we were just testing the patience of our guardian angel. Apparently, the instinct of self-preservation in those years was an optional feature that they forgot to enable at birth. Number 16, cellophane reincarnation. In an economy of total shortage, even disposable items gained the status of eternal artifacts. Imagine a kitchen where plastic bags are drying on clothespins over the sink. We did not throw away this thin packaging. The mechanics of frugality required carefully washing them with laundry soap to remove sausage or cheese residue, and then gently drying them to use for a 10th time. The images on the bags faded, the plastic became cloudy and covered in micro cracks, becoming a perfect incubator for bacteria. In programming terms, we were manually clearing temporary variables, trying to cheat the system due to a critical lack of system memory. We saved garbage, turning cheap polymer into a family heirloom, and passed bags from hand to hand like sacred scrolls. It was a triumph of form over common sense. We thought we were incredibly practical, but in reality, we simply refused to accept the concept of a disposable world. The system mocked us, forcing us to waste precious time washing something that should have been decomposing in a landfill. Number 17, aluminum communion. Dietetics of our childhood resembled forced chemical therapy. Loading into kindergarten was always accompanied by a humiliating morning ritual. The entire group was lined up, and a stone-faced nurse methodically poured a dose of vile fish oil into everyone's mouth from one huge aluminum spoon. The process mechanics excluded any refusal. The liquid smelled like a rotten ocean, left an oily film on the lips, and the shared spoon guaranteed a 100% transfer of all microflora from the first child to the last. It was a mandatory data exchange protocol over an unprotected channel where, along with vitamin D, we received all the current seasonal viruses. The system simply pushed an update to all users simultaneously, ignoring basic principles of sterility. We swallowed this yellow substance with tears in our eyes, hating seafood for years to come. We thought the government cared about our skeletons, but in fact, it was just stress testing our taste buds for disgust resistance. Nature endowed this fat with benefits, but forgot to add a patch with a normal smell. Number 18. Prickly shackles of gravity. The winter gear of a Soviet child was an elaborate torture device disguised as clothing. The foundation of this suffering was thick woolen tights of a hideous brown color. The mechanics of wearing them were pure endurance. They scratched wildly, causing constant itching, and instantly lost their shape, sagging at the knees like huge sacks. To keep this structure from slipping down to our ankles, we used special sadistic elastic bands with buttons that dug into our waists. This was armor with negative stats that not only restricted movement, but also dealt continuous passive damage to comfort. The character lost agility and speed, turning into a clumsy bear cub trying to scratch its legs against furniture corners. We wore this fiberglass on our bare skin, dreaming of summer as the only escape from the textile inquisition. We thought it was the price of warmth, but in reality, light industry simply did not know the word ergonomics. Apparently, the Matrix writers decided that a comfortable winter was too boring of a plot twist. Number 19. Sandbox geopolitics. Yard games often balanced on the edge of a crime report. An absolute hit was the knife game. A group of kids gathered in a circle on a patch of soft dirt, and everyone took turns throwing a real, heavy folding knife straight into the soil, mere inches from their opponent's shoes. The mechanics required cutting off pieces of the opponent virtual territory by drawing lines from the spot of a successfully planted blade. It was a harsh player versus player minigame where the friendly fire disable function was fundamentally absent. One wrong flick of the wrist, a slippery handle, and the blade plunged into your neighbor leg. We divided a dirty square of earth with the seriousness of global diplomats, risking our tendons for the sake of victory in a geopolitical battle for a flower bed. We thought we were practicing accuracy and a steady hand, but we were actually playing Russian roulette with cold steel. The irony of fate is that parents calmly watched from their windows as their kids threw knives at each other, considering it a healthy outdoor activity. The instinct for self-preservation quietly wept in the corner. Number 20. A budget mud volcano. Construction sites were our Klondike, and the main treasure there was calcium carbide. Gray rocks smelling like garlic used by welders. The entertainment mechanics were primitive but spectacular. A piece of carbide was thrown into an ordinary yard puddle or stuffed into a bottle of water. A violent chemical reaction occurred, releasing flammable acetylene gas. The puddle started to boil, hiss, and emit an incredible stench, and if you held a match to it, it erupted in a fireball. From a simulation architecture perspective, we found an exploit in the chemistry engine that allowed us to generate unstable thermal zones out of plain mud. If the bottle was tightly closed, it turned into a frag grenade, ripping the plastic apart and covering everyone with caustic white sludge. We reveled in our power over the elements, creating portable volcanoes on flat asphalt. We thought it was a triumph of science, but in reality, we were just ruining the yard ecology and risking facial chemical burns. Nature embedded the potential for creation in these stones, and we used it exclusively to destroy the silence. Number 21. Razor blade cleaning. Labor education in schools took forms that would drive modern lawyers crazy. During classroom cleaning duties, school children were forced to scrub black shoe scuffs and stubbornly stuck chewing gum off the linoleum. Since there were no chemical solvents, we were handed ordinary safety razor blades. The process mechanics were insane. A 10-year-old child crawled on their knees, scraping the floor with an exposed scalpel-sharp blade that bent and snapped under pressure. It was a manual process of removing junk code from the room interface, where the slightest mistake led to deep cuts on the fingers. We scraped the floors for hours, staining the linoleum with blood from micro traumas to achieve perfect cleanliness before the strict homeroom teacher arrived. We thought it instilled a love for hard work, but in reality, it was just a form of cheap and hazardous exploitation. The system trusted us with razor blades, but did not trust us with a voice. It is amazing how the pursuit of sterility forced the use of the dirtiest working methods. Number 22. Frankenstein sniper rifle. When ordinary slingshots stopped satisfying the need for accuracy, we invented biological firearms. The construction of a Rowan berry shooter consisted of a plastic tube, a cut-off finger from a thick medical glove, and a roll of blue electrical tape. The firing mechanics were based on vacuum tension. A hard, green, unripe Rowan berry was loaded into the tube, the glove was pulled back and sharply released. The projectile flew at such a speed that it left perfectly round, painful hematomas bruises on the opponent body. We crafted this sniper rifle out of medical waste, turning harmless berries into armor-piercing rounds. It was the perfect synergy of flora and synthetics, where nature provided infinite ammo and industry provided ballistic power. We had sniper duels in the bushes, dealing targeted damage to each other with no chance to dodge. We thought we were grand strategists, but we were just exploiting the aerodynamic bugs of round objects. The creator of the Rowan tree clearly did not plan for its fruit to become the caliber for Street Wars. At this point, the reality writers apparently went to lunch and left the plot to an intern. Number 23. An industrial survival quest. Loading the Autumn School location inevitably triggered a massive scrap metal collection event. The system set a task for the classes to gather the maximum amount of iron for the sake of a phantom victory. The quest mechanics turned children into worker ants. We scoured abandoned factories, dragged rusty cast iron radiators, unliftable pipes, and pieces of rebar, straining our young backs. It was a classic resource grind in a massive multiplayer online game where your character has an encumbrance debuff but is forced to haul loot back to base to raise the guild ranking. We stole iron from construction sites, competing in an absurd industrial marathon, ignoring the risk of tetanus from rusty nails and hernias from heavy lifting. We thought we were saving the country economy and building new tractors, but in fact we were doing free labor for logistics services. It was a brilliant hack by the government, turning hard physical labor into a gambling game for naive users. Number 24. Spice straight to the souls. Grandma Medicine was ruthless and took no half measures. If regular cupping glasses did not help a cough, a chemical attack on the lower extremities was initiated. The mechanics of the torture were as follows. Dry burning mustard powder was poured into your thick woolen socks, and you were forced to go to sleep in them for the entire night. From the standpoint of body thermodynamics, it was like forcibly applying aggressive thermal paste to the contacts of a motherboard. Your feet began to burn with hellfire. Sweat mixed with mustard, intensifying the chemical burn. You lay in the dark, unable to sleep from the pain, while your feet slowly marinated in this fiery powder. We believed that the heat traveled through our veins and killed microbes, but in reality, we were simply getting contact dermatitis for medical purposes. It was a philosophy of suffering elevated to an absolute. To forget about a cough, you must set your heels on fire. Apparently, guardian angels just closed their eyes to these sadistic procedures, realizing that even the laws of physics are powerless against grandma logic. Number 25. Gravitational surfing on spare parts. Winter entertainment in an era without specialized snow tubes and snowboards required maximum adaptability to the harsh landscape. Loading the snow hill activated a vehicle search, everything was used. Pieces of stolen linoleum, old cardboard, and the absolute pinnacle of madness, a torn off hood from a discarded truck. The mechanics of sliding down on this heavy metal slab implied neither brakes nor steering. A crowd of you would sit on this piece of iron, push off, and fly down the icy slope, relying entirely on blind luck. It was gravitational surfing, where the physics engine went crazy from the lack of friction. We used broken environmental objects as transport, ignoring the fact that a collision between a heavy hood and a tree or another kid dealt fatal kinetic damage. We enjoyed the speed, feeling like immortal conquerors of the ice. We thought it was top-tier piloting, but essentially we were just testing object collisions on our own ribs. Inertia always had the last laugh. Number 26. The solar laser of the proletariat. As soon as the clear spring days arrived, every self-respecting schoolboy pulled an ordinary magnifying glass out of his pocket. Wooden benches, fences, and windowsills became locations for creativity. The mechanics of this process were majestic. We caught a beam of sunlight, focused it into a blindingly white, scorching dot, and methodically, millimeter by millimeter, burned swear words or our names into the wood. In terms of energy management, this was a direct interception of a star orbital thermonuclear power to deal pixel damage to bench textures. We felt like masters of light using the laws of optics for banal vandalism. The wood smoked, smelled like a campfire, and our eyesight slowly deteriorated from staring at the bright spot. We thought we were leaving an eternal mark on the yard history, but we were actually just ruining public property using free cosmic energy. Apparently, the universe gave us the sun to synthesize vitamins, and we turned it into a pocket blaster for writing nonsense. Number 27, the ceiling acupuncturist. Boredom during school recesses birthed projects that were brilliant in their absurdity. One of these was a homemade dart consisting of 4 matches tightly bound with thread around a sewing needle and a square piece of paper acting as a tail stabilizer. The entertainment mechanics were vertical. This lightweight, aerodynamically perfect projectile was forcefully launched straight into the school ceiling. The sharp needle firmly embedded itself in the soft plaster, and the dart remained hanging there forever. From a level design perspective, we were intentionally inserting corrupted files into the unreachable skybox zone. The classroom ceilings were dotted with these white paper crosses, like an upside-down graveyard of wasted time. We took pride in every successful throw, watching the cleaning ladies with mops vainly trying to clear the firmament of our classroom. We thought we were altering the architecture of space, but we were actually just testing the tensile strength of the school plaster. The gravity system glitched, allowing our needles to get stuck between heaven and earth forever. Number 28. Unrendered locations. In a world without computers, we sought adventures in physical spaces with deactivated security systems. Unfinished buildings and abandoned concrete factories became ideal places for hide and seek and tag. No fences, no security, just gray mazes of brick and rebar. The movement mechanics in this location were extreme. We ran along narrow beams on the 5th floor, jumped over open elevator shafts, and walked along the edge of cliffs. It was an exploration of unfinished simulation levels, where developers had not yet placed the invisible walls preventing a fall. One wrong move, slippery concrete, and you were sent into a free fall with a fatal outcome. But there was no fear. We dashed across these concrete skeletons as if we had a quick save before every difficult jump. We thought it was the best amusement park, but in fact, it was a natural selection polygon with the highest chance of account deletion. The construction site forgave no mistakes, but it was exactly this proximity to the edge that made the game feel so alive. Number 29, a rusty oasis. The hydration problem during long summer sprints through the yards was solved radically and unsanitarily. Nobody went home for a glass of water to avoid being locked inside until evening. The mechanics of quenching thirst involved finding street water pumps, or even worse, rubber hoses left by janitors for watering flower beds. You pressed the heavy lever of the pump and greedily drank water right from the rusty metal nozzle. From a network security standpoint, we were connecting to an open, unfiltered data source without the slightest firewall. Along with the cool water, we swallowed scale, rubber particles, dirt, and the entire spectrum of street bacteria. Our stomachs worked like industrial filters, processing dirt without a single crash. We thought only of the coolness, ignoring the taste of iron and slime on our lips. It was a lottery for the immune system, which we won every day. Apparently, nature deliberately scattered these rusty checkpoints to harden our internal organs to the state of stainless steel. Number 30, a glass grenade in the kitchen. Making sparkling water at home was a process full of hidden menace. In the center of the table stood a heavy glass siphon wrapped in metal mesh, to which a small compressed gas cartridge was attached. The mechanics of carbonating the water were accompanied by a loud hiss and a buildup of internal pressure. But sometimes the firmware of this glass bomb experienced a critical failure. If the flask had a micro crack, the pressure blew the siphon apart with a deafening explosion. Shards of heavy glass flew around the kitchen at the speed of shrapnel, embedding themselves in furniture and walls. In terms of hardware, we were manually overclocking an unstable pressurized vessel, hoping the materials would handle the load. We were making a drink while risking shrapnel wounds right at the dinner table. We thought we were controlling gases, but in fact, we were just playing kitchen minesweeper with fragile glass. Household appliance developers clearly added this element of unpredictability so life would not seem too bland. Number 31, rubber ballistics. The pinnacle of long-range projectile weapons was a slingshot made from a thick branch and a wide grayish-yellow medical tourniquet bought for pennies at the pharmacy. The mechanics of this device allowed you to launch heavy stones or lead balls over huge distances with terrifying kinetic force. The rubber was stretched to the limit, accumulating potential energy capable of shattering double-pane glass or leaving a deep dent in metal. We converted medical supplies designed to stop bleeding into high-level weapons that caused those exact bleedings. It was a brilliant engineering paradox. We went to wastelands, staging artillery bombardments of glass jars, feeling the recoil in our hands from the powerful rubber. We believed it was a tool for hunting crows, but in reality, it was an illegal portable cannon breaking the balance of the yard ecosystem. The system sold us weapon parts disguised as a first aid kit, quietly chuckling at the results. Number 32, chainmail made of fiberglass. Winter required insulation, and the main defensive artifact became a sweater knitted from the coarse, prickly wool of an unknown animal. The mechanics of wearing this armor were unbearable. The fibers penetrated through the thin fabric of a shirt, irritating the skin until red spots appeared. To survive in this shell, you had to wear 2 thick shirts underneath, creating a multi-layered barrier between your flesh and the aggressive textile. In role-playing game terms, we equipped high-level cold resistance armor that had a hidden debuff, a constant passive damage in the form of incessant itching. You sat in class, sweating in this cocoon, unable to move without pain. We thought it saved us from the frost, but in fact, it was tactile torture that made us hate winter. Light industry created clothing that warmed you not through insulation, but by making you constantly rub against your own nerve endings. The perfect metaphor for discomfort for the illusion of protection. Number 33. Forced reflashing of motor skills. The harshest intervention into a human base code was the system for fighting left-handedness. If a first grader picked up a pen with their left hand, the pedagogical machine launched a ruthless formatting protocol. The mechanics were brutal. Teachers hit fingers with a ruler, or even tied the left hand to the back of the chair, forcing them to write with their right hand, tracing crooked letters through tears. From a brain architecture perspective, this was a forced switch of the main control interface to incompatible drivers. The system did not need non-standard configurations, it required absolutely identical units, writing at the exact same angle. We broke children neural connections, causing stuttering and stress, all for the sake of perfect symmetry in notebooks. We thought we were correcting a natural defect, but in reality, we were just crippling the psyche for the aesthetics of uniformity. It was the apotheosis of absurdity, forcing the brain to run with errors just to meet a standard. Nature created diversity, and the system reduced everyone to a common denominator using a rope and a ruler. We are closing the doors of this virtual survival museum. The Hall of Absurdity empties out, but the echo of those strange years is permanently written into our subcortex. Looking back, you realize this simulation was poorly coded, full of dangerous bugs, and absolutely never safety tested, but it is exactly this imperfection that made us who we are. We learned to find exploits in the most hopeless situations and smile where others would have hit the exit button. Now it is your turn to contribute to this archive of madness. Write down your personal fact number 34 in the comments. What kind of wild stuff from your childhood do you still recall with a nervous chuckle? We search for logic in the past, while the universe just flips a coin, watching us wash plastic bags and chew asphalt. End of communication. Quick save often, and do not forget to test the textures for durability.